This morning we're hearing, it's Transfiguration, so this morning we hear the story of Jesus being transfigured on the mountaintop, and paired with that is a story from Exodus about Moses being called to the mountaintop to meet with God. It's the first piece of the story. He comes down with the Ten Commandments story, right? So that whole time we've been hearing that, this picture on the screen here, it's a little bit hard to see, but as you've been hearing those stories, this picture is in fact not a live action shot of the transfiguration of Jesus taken by Peter because he happened to have his phone. It's a Brocken Spectre. Anybody seen a Brocken Spectre before? Apparently they have. All right. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon. If you climb mountains, you might see one. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon in the mountains when you're high up and you're surrounded by, you might be surrounded by cloud or fog or mist. If the sun's behind you, it casts a reflection into the cloud or the mist. And it can appear to be enormous, in part because you'll see other sort of bits of terrain around you, and like the perspective is a little bit weird, so it appears that the figure is enormous. It is in fact you, but it's the shadow landing on cloud or mist, and so if it moves or it has different densities, it can appear as though the specter is moving. The thing around it that looks like an aura is called a glory, and that's caused by sunlight reflecting and refracting off of droplets of water in the mist and the cloud. So, I know what you're thinking. Oh, no. This is going to be one of those Robin explains a miracle as a naturally occurring phenomenon things. It's not going to be that. It's not going to be that, mostly. The thing is, a lot of commentaries even, I read a lot of commentaries this week that said it's best to not explain the Transfiguration story. It just is. It's a miracle. It's the purest of miracles. It's a miracle in which Jesus is revealed to be truly who Jesus is. That's why we're hearing it on the last Sunday of Epiphany, right? It's the bookends of Epiphany. The first story is the story of the shining star. The story at the end of Epiphany, before Lent, is the story of the shining Jesus, right? Yes, okay. Except, here's the thing about that. If this is simply a story, as the last 5-6 weeks have been, of how Jesus is revealed to be Jesus, what does that say to you about you? Is this a moment to simply acknowledge this is Jesus and this is how we are with Jesus? Or is this a moment to actually acknowledge where Jesus is in our lives for each of us? So it's very easy to tell this story and go, it's a miracle. Jesus is revealed in a bright shining light. The voice of God is heard. And we can be like the disciples in the story, right? Peter, James, and John. The first thing that happens is Jesus lights up like a bright light. And what's the first thing they want to do? They want to build something to mark the moment. They want to memorialize it. They want to build a structure that will make sure that that brief moment in time lasts forever and is marked as having occurred. The second thing that happens is that they cower in fear on the ground. These are the two marks of the history of the church. We want to build stuff so we can hold a moment in time forever and nothing changes, or we're scared. It's about fear. Except it isn't either of those things. So what if for just a moment we stepped out of those models and we were Jesus in the story? What if we were willing to actually step out, take a chance, and say, I don't know, crawl across the floor to the front, away from my mom, where people can see me, where I can find out what's going on over here. Why is this guy standing here talking? That's pretty exciting. If Evie were on the mountain, she would have been the first one to go over to Jesus and say, hey, what's happening? If she had Lego, she'd probably want to build something though, right? Maybe. What if we're Jesus in the story? I know we don't like being Jesus because it's Jesus. But okay, but that's kind of how we treat this story. The same way we treat everything else when we're talking about Jesus. We treat Jesus as if Jesus is either the incarnation of God, yes, to be worshipped, a teacher to be heard and respected, but what if Jesus is more than that? What if Jesus is like a mentor? What if the point of Jesus isn't to make you change to be different, but to transform you into simply being who you are? What if Jesus, the Word made flesh, right? The Gospel of John opens with Jesus is the Word made flesh. We get the Word part. We're really good at the Jesus is divine part, but the flesh part, we tend to only hang on to the story about how he could be killed at the end. What about the rest of it? He's a human being, just like you and me. We also teach that God's in everything, right? You are created in the image of God. God is in all of creation. So, if God is in you, and God is in Jesus, then how is Jesus not in you? See, instead of, when we treat Jesus as simply, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say simply. Don't throw anything. Bolt of lightning. If we treat Jesus only as a figure to be worshipped, we can hold him over there and keep him at a distance. If he's a teacher to learn from in order that we might change, then again, we can still hold Jesus over there. Even when we talk about Jesus as being our companion on the journey, our friend who walks beside us, we're reluctant to reach out a hand and hold hands with Jesus. She learned that move from you or Morgan? That's just kind of the wiggling her butt there. It's just kind of, yeah. See, Evie hasn't learned to do that yet, so she's discovering stuff. She's curious and she's wanting to learn. She's wanting to strike out for herself and find things. We're the disciples. We want to build something to sit in or fall on the ground cowering in fear. Although now she's realized this is not where I want to be. Aww. Thank you. See, intuitively, this morning Evie knew Robin needed help with this morning's sermon. Because part of the message, I think, of this morning's sermon is that we not treat the Transfiguration the way we always treat the Transfiguration, because that's the way we treat Jesus. Instead of holding it out there like a miracle that we can just kind of observe and we're not really party to, what if we were actually in it? What if the miracle's you actually being like Jesus and shining the light that's you into the world? What if that's a miracle? That would be a miracle, actually, for some of us. It would truly be a miracle. But that's the thing, is that we have a tendency to hold Jesus away rather than hold Jesus close. Even I think when we try to do that, it's the God, Jesus, that we are trying to hold close. As if Jesus is divine and we are not. What if you are? What if part of the story of Jesus is about us realizing the divineness that is in us, the gift of God that is in you, and living that out? What if we treated Jesus less as a teacher who's going to change us and mold us into something we're not. Jesus was a mentor to whom we are, and I initially thought I was stealing this from Jeff Kirby, but it turns out it's all over the place. But if you ever come across a book by Jeff Kirby that's called Jesus Apprentice, you should read it. What if Jesus is a mentor to whom we're an apprentice? In other words, we're simply learning to live out the skills that we have that are within us under a master of those skills. What if that's how we treated Jesus? What if we held him close and realized the point was to teach us to be who we are, to find the divine that's in us, and to live that out? See, I don't think that takes anything away from the miracle of the story. I honestly don't. Because I think we struggle so hard with being that, finding the wonderfulness in us and living to that. We find it easy, I think, sometimes to learn how to change into something we're not, easier than recognizing what's actually in us and living that. See, because when you can, you have touched God. You have been with God because that's the divine in you. We started the season of Epiphany with this great, bright, shining light in the sky, the light that brought the Magi to find Jesus. And we call it Epiphany, recognizing that it means the revealing. And each week we hear a story of how Jesus is revealed to be Jesus. So here we are in week 7 of Epiphany. And here's a story in which Jesus is revealed in the same light as the star. Except each of those stories also reveals something about you and I. And each of those stories builds to this story, in which, however you find those things that are you, truly you should shine. The point is to shine. Is not hide them away, to shine. And in fact, we put this story at the end of the season of Epiphany, this Transfiguration story. But Lent starts next week. Lent is traditionally a time in the church where it's darker, it's more somber. The color for Lent is purple. It's a wilderness time. We've traditionally told the stories about it's how Jesus is tempted in the wilderness. But is that all the wilderness is about? Isn't the wilderness a place you go to learn things? In Matthew's gospel, in fact, in all of the Gospels that tell this story of Transfiguration, that's not where the story is. In the Gospels, the story occurs as almost like a hinge between a life of teaching of Jesus and heading to Jerusalem and the cross. It's almost like we've been on the mountain and now we're going into the valley of the shadow of death. I think there's a point in the story being there. And for us, and it can be helpful in the season of Lent as we experience the wilderness of Lent, for us, it's a recognition that the light of Jesus doesn't stay on the mountain, and neither should yours. Living true to who you are and the love of God that is in your heart isn't reserved for the big moments. It's also on the mountain. It's also reserved. It's also for the moments that you are in the valley. The moments when you apparently are struggling to get a whole sentence out that explains that. Who we are isn't reserved for moments. It's for every day. That's the story of Jesus. And it's a story that we should share in, not hold off and look at and observe and wonder what we could learn from that, but to actually embrace and engage and bring it into our own lives. Because we'll have experiences on the mountain, and we'll have experiences in the valley. We'll have moments of new life, and we'll have moments of death in our own lives. In all of those moments, you are still the love of God that is in you, ready to be lived and shared with others. So, let's go and shine.